again, students. Welcome to our document discussion for the last module, Module 8, the Civil War and Reconstruction. So we made it to the end, yay! We've got four documents and a film in this module to discuss. So let's hop in. To make sure you bring them up, we've got Frederick Douglass, What Shall Be Done with the Slaves If Emancipated? The Emancipation Project, Jordan Anderson, the Mississippi Black Codes, and by now you should have done the assignment for the film, Slavery by Another Name. So make sure you have those handy, and we'll start walking through them. First, Frederick Douglass, What Shall Be Done with the Slaves If Emancipated? Who is Frederick Douglass, first of all? Who is he? What is he doing? What kind of document is this? What's his message? You guessed it, gold star again. Frederick Douglass is an abolitionist. He's a former slave, like so many other people that we've talked about here. You know, we had Olaudah Equiano, Venture Smith, Harriet Jacobs, kind of sort of Solomon Northup. As soon as these people get their freedom, the first thing they do is they go and try to convince people to abolish slavery. And Frederick Douglass is certainly no different, but he's almost certainly the most eloquent. He's an incredible orator. He goes on the lecture circuit. He starts writing speeches and pamphlets and newspaper articles and newspaper columns trying to convince people to abolish slavery. He just inundates them with all of this incredible information. And it's hard to argue with. And this is probably my favorite thing that he's ever written. This is a speech that he gave in January of 1862 in the middle of the Civil War. Remember, right after the Emancipation Proclamation, or right before, sorry, JK, the Emancipation Proclamation, right when the Civil War is starting to become about something other than states' rights and starting to become what it was always really about for the South, a state's right to own slaves. So, Frederick Douglass, in this speech, he is giving an answer to this question: what shall be done with the slaves if emancipated? There are a lot of people at the time talking about the potential problems to freeing the slaves. And so at the end of that first paragraph there, he goes through a lot of potential problems with freeing the slaves. What are some of those? He says they won't work. They'll become violent. They'll become a burden upon society. The laboring classes will become in bitter conflict. There'll be a race war. So that all of this violence, all of this poverty, he says they won't work. They won't be able to handle liberty is the fear. There's supposed problems with this question. What does Frederick Douglass say? What is the answer to that question? What shall we do with the slaves if we free them? Nothing! That's his answer. At the top of the second page, he says, do nothing with them. Mind your own business. Your doing with them has been the cause of all of their misfortune. Leave them alone. Just give us our freedom and we'll be fine. That's what he says. Our answer is do nothing with them. It's really quite simple. And then he goes and he backs himself up towards the end of that paragraph. He says, he starts going through all of these rights that people have, and that's the freedmen will have the right to work, has a right to learn. He says, has a right to vote. He says his choice deserves as much respect and protection as your own. He can exercise religious liberty. So all of these very basic, very foundational, I mean, think of Bill of Rights type stuff here. Work, education, religion, voting, freedom of speech, all of these very basic rights that people do not have under slavery, but that they will have and should have if and when they are emancipated. And so in the third page, this is probably the longest document that I made you all read this semester. Woe is you. It's a good one though. It's really snarky. I like it. The third page, towards the bottom, he starts answering all of those questions. Frederick Douglass one by one, systematically, bullet point by bullet point, goes through all of those concerns that he brought up in the first page and obliterates them. He says, will he work? Why not? He's used to it. You've been making him work from dawn till dusk for his entire life. I'm pretty sure he can do it by now. Second question, would you turn them all loose? Certainly, we're no better than God, and God's turned them loose here on the earth, so why don't we? He says. Third one, would you let them all stay here? Sure, they're here already. They're not going to take up any more room. Number 4, the fourth question, would it be safe? Question of race war? There's no good reason why it wouldn't be. He said that slavery is more of a reason to fight than freedom. Once people have their freedom, they're not going to need to fight for their freedom. So Frederick Douglass, towards the end there, showing a lot of snark, which is why I love him. But very systematically, point by point by point, goes through all of these reasons why not freeing slaves is just quite ridiculous. And because he's such a great orator, is so convincing to so many people, which leads us to our next document, the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, the very next year. It doesn't take too long. Once the ball finally gets rolling, emancipation starts happening really quite quickly. But Emancipation Proclamation is touted as very important, and by all means it is one of the more important documents of American history. That's why I included it. But it's not as great as you might think. What does she mean, you say? Did the Emancipation Proclamation free a single slave? No. Why? Why would I say that? In the second paragraph, who wrote this, we know, I hope. Abraham Lincoln, your friend and mine, 16th President of the United States, President during the Civil War. He finally comes out and says, okay, right, this war is about slavery. He writes the Emancipation Proclamation. It goes into effect the first day of January, year of our Lord, 1863. Here's the important part. All persons held as slaves with any state or part of a state, he's talking about West Virginia there, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States shall be freed. He's talking about the South that is in rebellion, that has no longer, that is no longer adhering to the laws of the United States. Those slaves are free. He doesn't free any slaves in the North, where he has control, where he can actually enforce this new rule. He's not able to enforce freedom in the South. So why do it? What it says here, right? Wait, pause. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? On the back. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth paragraph down, he says, I further declare and make known such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States. Such persons. Okay, so he's talking about the slaves in the South who escape the South, escape the plantations, and then go and join the Union Army. This Emancipation Proclamation, it's not done for any moral reasons necessarily. It's not even necessarily done for political reasons. It's a war measure. He's writing this as commander-in-chief, and he says that up front. This is for military necessity, quote. This is done for military necessity. If he frees slaves in the South, if Abraham Lincoln and the Union Army say that slaves in the South are now henceforth free, then when the Union Army comes ravaging through the South, those slaves can escape, they can run to the Union Army, they can join the Union Army. The South will no longer have benefit of their labor. They won't have any money, they won't have any food, they won't have any cotton to sell to their allies in Europe. The South doesn't get them. Now the North, the Union, The army gets them. It's a war measure. It's weakening the South so that it's weakening the South and strengthening the North. So the Emancipation Proclamation, one, frees the slaves in the South, which in and of itself is a good thing, but not very effective. But the effective part is saying that then those slaves, since they are now free, they're freedmen, they can join the Union Army. And a lot of them do. A lot of them do. So many men join the military as either soldiers or sailors. A lot join the Navy, where they're treated fairly equally. As soldiers, relatively unequally. They're not paid as much. They never get to be officers, and they also face a very unique threat because they are black, because they are freedmen. If a Southern company captures a white Northern soldier, that person is sent to a prisoner of war camp. However, if a Southern company captures a black Northern soldier, that person is either sent into slavery, which is bad enough, or they're killed outright. Those soldiers face a very unique threat. It is very risky to be an African American soldier during the Civil War. Risky to be a soldier during any war, but especially now. And this changes Lincoln's views, which is very important. In 1863, when Lincoln writes the Emancipation Proclamation, he's doing it as commander-in-chief. He's doing it for the war. But after seeing so many men volunteer, after seeing so many men risk their lives fighting for their own freedom, he starts sticking up for them. He starts pushing for a more equal treatment in the military. He starts sticking up for them in prisoner of war exchanges when the South says, no, we're not going to give you any of our African prisoners of war, the food that they keep, they mostly send them into slavery, so they're not there. And when Lincoln finds that out, he says, well, fine, if you're not going to give us our black soldiers back, then we're not going to give you any soldiers back. Deal with it. After the war is starting to come to a close, Lincoln starts pushing for equal suffrage, equal voting rights. He says, hey, if you were a soldier in the Civil War and you fought for your freedom, then by golly, you deserve a vote. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, he's killed before he can make this a reality, so it doesn't happen. But the idea is there. It makes a big impression, and Lincoln is starting to change his mind and become much less racist. Lincoln was racist. Everybody was racist. So, Emancipation Proclamation, an important document because it kind of sort of mostly frees the slaves, but more importantly, it gives them an opportunity to fight for their freedom and earn their freedom, and gives them some opportunity to have more of a livelihood. So, spoiler alert again, the Civil War ends in a Union victory. The slaves are freed. There is no more institution of slavery. Hooray, hooray, hooray! 1865 is when our next document picks up. Jordan Anderson, writing to his former master. This is my favorite thing. This is my favorite document out of all of American history ever. So much snark. I love the snark. Tell me about Jordan Anderson. Who is he, and what is the situation behind this letter? Yeah, Jordan Anderson, a former slave. And now it's 1865, the Civil War is over, he has his freedom. And so he has a lot more rights than he did before. And this letter, let's just walk through it, man, because there's a lot going on in this letter. So, very first thing, right off the bat, we see that this letter is written from Ohio. Jordan Anderson, the former slave, is in Ohio. He's writing to his former slave master, who is in Tennessee. Why is that important? Right. He's away. He's in the North. Jordan Anderson has made it to the North, made it to freedom. He has a whole new life in the North. And why is he writing? What's the circumstances behind it? I think I asked that before. What did you say? Coming in? Yeah. He said, Colonel Anderson, the former master, says, hey, Jordan, Oh, buddy, oh, pal. I have this plantation here that I no longer have anyone to work. Will you come home to Tennessee and work for me on my plantation? And Jordan Anderson says, not no, but hell no. Right? Very first thing, right off the bat, he says, I thought the Yankees would have hung you long before this for harboring Rebs they found at your house. I suppose they never heard about your going to Colonel Martin's to kill the Union soldier that was left there. Why does he bring that up in the very first paragraph? He has blackmail. He's blackmailing his former master. He says, let's not forget, Colonel Anderson, that I have dirt on you, and if I need to, I can go to the authorities and get you in a lot of trouble. I know all your secrets. I love it. Not very subtle there, is he? But then on the second paragraph, he starts talking about all of the reasons why he shouldn't go back to Tennessee. In other words, he starts talking about all the reasons why his life is so good in the North now. He has so many rights, and he talks about them all in the second paragraph. He says, I get $25 a month with victuals and clothing. What's victuals? Food. So he gets a food allowance, he gets a clothing allowance, and he gets paid for his labor. He owns his labor. He has the right to his own labor. I have a comfortable home for Mandy. The folks call her Mrs. Anderson. Why is that important? Two things. First, Mrs. They got married. Legally. Something they couldn't do under slavery. The folks call her Mrs. Anderson. They don't call her Mandy. They don't call her, hey girl. Mrs. Anderson. She has respect. So he has the right to marriage. He has the right to personal respect now. The children go to school and are learning well. The teacher says Grundy has a head for a preacher. Why is that important? They have the right to education, something that wasn't going to happen under slavery. They go to Sunday school, and me and Mandy attend church regularly. They have the right to religion, something that was not going to happen under slavery. If you will write and say what wages you will give me, I will be better able to decide whether it's to my advantage to move back again. I decide, he says. I decide. You don't decide about my life anymore. He has the right to his own life. So many rights. He has a laundry list of rights that he has now that he did not have under slavery in Tennessee. Right to his own labor. Right to freedom of movement. He's left the South. Right to marriage. Right to respect, personal respect. Right to education. Right to religion. Right to decide his own life. So many things. In the end of the third paragraph, let's jump down there now. He says, you know what, Colonel Anderson, maybe if you write and tell me that I can have some good wages, I might decide to come back. And he's being pretty tongue-in-cheek when he says that. Mandy says she would be afraid to go back with some proof that you were disposed to treat us justly and kindly. We've concluded to test your sincerity by asking you to send us our wages for the time we served you. What's that mean? He's asking for back pay. Is that going to happen? Is a former slave master going to give their former slave back pay? No. And Jordan Anderson knows that Colonel Anderson is not going to pay him back pay. But it shows that he's intelligent. It shows that he's savvy enough to know that he deserves back pay. And not only that, but he does the math. I served you for 32 years and Mandy for 20 years, $25 a month for me and $2 a week for Mandy. Our wages would amount to $11,600. Okay, all of the money. He does the math. He's very clever. He's very intelligent. And he's also very fair. The next thing, add to this the interest. Very savvy. And deduct what you paid for clothing and 3 doctor's visits for me, and the balance will show what we're entitled to. So he's very clever, he's very savvy, he's very intelligent, and he's able to prove that to his former master. The paragraph ends, please send the money to me by Adams Express in care of V. Winters, Esquire. What's an Esquire? Who gets that title after their name? Lawyers. Right. He has law counsel. He has an attorney. This man is clever. This man is intelligent. And he's proving it. And he's shoving Colonel Anderson's face in it. And I love it. So Jordan Anderson tells us that long laundry list of rights and liberties that freedmen had under Reconstruction after the Civil War ends. He shows us how far they come in such a short amount of time. But similarly, our next document, the Mississippi Black Codes, show us how short that time is. Reconstruction doesn't last forever. Reconstruction does have an end. The Mississippi Black Codes, this particular document is from 1865, pretty darn early, right after the Civil War ends. In other words, what I'm trying to say, as soon as the Civil War ends, the southern states go to work and start trying to legally return slaves to a pre-war condition, making it very, very hard, if not impossible, to enjoy those rights and freedoms to which they are entitled. So let's just talk about a few of them. The first thing, vagrancy law, very beginning. It's unlawful for freedmen, free Negroes, and mulattoes to unlawfully assemble themselves. What's the problem with that? Freedom of assembly. Have we heard that before? This flies right in the face of the Constitution. They can't do this. That's totally illegal, but they do it. Unlawfully assembling themselves. It is illegal for a small group of African American people to assemble. So you can't go to school, you can't go to church, you can't have family dinner without breaking the law. It's impossible for African Americans to not break the law. Where are we at? Under the Civil Rights of Freedom section, towards the bottom, section 1, illegal to acquire personal property. What does that sound like? I thought all people had a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which is normally interpreted as meaning property and money. So this flies right in the face of the Constitution again. What's the last one? Towards the end of the document, the Penal Code, section 1 again. Just some examples. No freedman, free Negro, mulatto shall keep or carry firearms of any kind or any ammunition, dirk, or bowie knife. A dirk is a knife, right? Where have we heard that before? The Second Amendment, right to bear arms. This flies right in the face of the Constitution. Again, a dirk, a knife, like maybe a steak knife. It makes it impossible for freedmen not to break the law. Mississippi is not the only one who creates these sorts of laws. And towards the very, very end of that penal code of our document, section 5, what happens if you break the law? Whether you are proclaimed a vagrant, you don't have a job, whether you're found with a knife, whether you assemble yourself unlawfully, whatever your crime is, what happens? Such person shall be hired out by the sheriff or other officer to any white person who will pay the fine. They're re-enslaved. Which leads us to our last assignment. That film, that documentary that we watched called Slavery by Another Name. All of these vagrancy codes, all of these black codes that states enact to make it all but impossible for an African American to be a law-abiding citizen are done with the intention of re-enslaving, for all intents and purposes, African American people. And it lasts a long time. It lasts clear up until the mid-1900s, and one might make the argument today. So I don't want to dwell a whole lot on this because I think that the film is very blunt and very self-explanatory, but we have to understand that this idea of convict leasing, right? At the end of that Mississippi Black Code, if you're a black person and you break the law, or they say you break the law, you're hired out to a white person who pays your fine. Who is that probably going to be? I don't know. Maybe your former master on the plantation. And so these former plantation owners or miners or people who are working in forestry or whatever the case, railroads, whatever the case may be, they're able to they're able to lease convicts in a very, 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 very cheap rate. So that question number 6, what I really was hoping, why is convict leasing worse than slavery? What I hope you get out of that is that at least under slavery, as terrible as slavery is, at least under slavery, slave owners have some sort of economic investment in those slaves. They're not going to kill them because they cost too much money up front. But a convict, a few years later, a convict costs them nothing. Food is next to nothing. Their medicine is zero. Their housing is almost nothing. Clothing's super minimal. They're very, very cheap, which makes them expendable for these people. So they don't even have any sort of economic investment in those convicts, so they can literally work them to death, work them as hard as they need to make a profit on the plantation or in the mine or in the railroad or whatever. Why is this allowed to continue? That 8th question. Teddy Roosevelt shies away from uprooting forced labor. As soon as it comes out how widespread it is, suddenly it's too widespread. And that's the problem. The Theodore Roosevelt administration finds out how widespread this is. It's not just a couple of cases in a couple of counties. It's everywhere, all the time. And uprooting it would have brought down the entire Southern economy. And if the Southern economy goes down, the entire U.S. economy would have gone down. So they don't uproot it. They let it happen. That 9th question. This one was really kind of wide open. But the general gist of what I was hoping that you would get out of that is that this idea, since it is so difficult, almost impossible for African Americans not to break the law, that means a lot of them are in jail. 90% of prisoners at this time were black. 90%. An overwhelming majority of prisoners are black. And so this makes people start to think that there is some sort of inherent link between blackness and criminality. If 90% of the people in the prison are black, then that means that all blacks are criminals. And of course we know this isn't true. But that's where that idea starts. It starts here. It has very deep roots. And since they believe that all blacks are criminals, that there is some sort of link between blackness and criminality, then that means that maybe freedom was a mistake. Maybe Thomas Jefferson and George Fitzhugh and all of those types of people were right. That maybe it is true that African Americans can't handle liberty, can't handle freedom. And that becomes a major problem in today's world, especially if you're thinking about things that are happening more recently. I encourage you, we're at the end of the semester, but I encourage you to carry these things forward in your brain. We've got the Black Lives Matter movement happening right now. There's a lot of violence in high schools. And it all comes back to these things that were happening in the 1860s and before. So, with that, this is the end of our last primary document discussion. Had a lot of fun. I hope that you had fun, and best of luck on your end of semester exams and papers. I'll see you later.